Inside a quiet, upscale bakery, a paralyzed 7-year-old girl sat entirely alone in her wheelchair, staring at a pristine birthday cake. Her billionaire CEO mother had abandoned her yet again for an emergency
Happy
board
birthday.
meeting, treating her more
Mind
like
if
an
we join you?
inconvenience than a daughter.
Your cake is so pretty.
Tears streamed silently
Thank
down
you.
the little girl's
It's my
face
birthday.
as wealthy patrons
Then
walked
let's make a
past,
wish.
deliberately looking away. But then, the door chimed. A poor, single-dad carpenter, struggling just to buy a cheap cupcake for his own daughter, noticed her quiet devastation. Ignoring the judgmental stares, he walked straight to her table, pulled out a chair, and softly whispered, "No one should celebrate alone. May we join you?" Before we see the CEO's shocking reaction, tell us what state or country you are watching from in the comments below. We love our global Heartland Tales family. Your comment helps this story reach more people. And if you believe that true love heals all wounds, don't forget to subscribe. The rain in Seattle fell in relentless, freezing sheets, washing the gray streets in a layer of winter misery. Inside the soundproof cabin of the $200,000 Maybach, however, the storm was nothing more than a silent movie playing against the tinted glass. Evelyn Vance did not look out the window. At 34, she was the brilliant, untouchable CEO of Vance Enterprises. She wore a tailored charcoal suit that cost more than most people earned in a month, and she was currently staring at her glowing tablet with the focused, unblinking intensity of a predator. Her phone had been ringing continuously for the last 20 minutes. A multi-million-dollar merger was allegedly falling apart, and Evelyn was busy calculating exactly whose career she was going to end to fix it. Sitting directly across from her was her 7-year-old daughter, Clara. Clara was small for her age, wearing a beautiful pale pink dress that looked entirely untouched. She sat in a custom-built, lightweight titanium wheelchair, a silent, constant reminder of the tragic car accident 2 years ago that had left her paralyzed from the waist down and had taken her father's life. Clara was clutching a small, silver-wrapped gift box in her lap. Today was her birthday. "Drive faster, Thomas," Evelyn commanded the driver, not lifting her eyes from the screen. "I need to be at the downtown office in 15 minutes. "Mom?" Clara's voice was as fragile as spun glass. "You said we were going to get cake. You promised." Evelyn finally stopped typing. She let out a sharp, frustrated sigh that filled the quiet car. She looked at her daughter, not with cruelty, but with the profound, exhausting impatience of a woman who believed she was carrying the weight of the world and resented anything that made it heavier. "Clara, darling, please try to understand," Evelyn said, rubbing her temples. "There is a crisis at the firm. If I don't handle it, hundreds of people lose their jobs. I can't just pause reality for a birthday cake." She tapped the glass partition. "Thomas, pull over at La Petite Patisserie on 4th Avenue. 2 minutes later, the luxury car idled in front of the warm, glowing windows of the city's most exclusive bakery. Evelyn had the bodyguard carry Clara's wheelchair inside and settle her at a corner table. Evelyn handed the bakery manager a black credit card. "Bring her the largest strawberry cake you have. I will be back in exactly 1 hour." Without another word, without a hug, without even waiting to see the cake arrive, Evelyn turned on her designer heels and walked back out into the rain. The bell above the door chimed cheerfully, masking the sound of a mother leaving her paralyzed child entirely alone on the one day she was supposed to feel special. Clara did not cry out. She had learned over the past 2 years that crying only made her mother more stressed. So she simply sat there, a tiny, broken bird in a high-tech wheelchair, surrounded by the smell of vanilla and sugar. When the massive, beautiful strawberry cake was placed in front of her with 7 unlit candles, it only made the empty chair across from her feel larger. The bustling, wealthy patrons of the bakery glanced at the disabled girl sitting by herself, but they quickly looked away, uncomfortable with the sadness radiating from her table. A single tear escaped Clara's eye, rolling down her cheek and landing softly on the cashmere blanket covering her useless legs. Outside, in the freezing rain, the world was completely different. Elias Thorne pushed through the biting wind, his thick, calloused hands shoved deep into the pockets of his faded canvas work jacket. He was 32 years old, a carpenter who smelled permanently of pine sawdust and honest sweat. He had lost his wife 3 years ago, leaving him to raise his spunky, bright-eyed daughter Maya entirely on his own. He didn't have a titanium wheelchair or a Maybach. What he had was exactly $12.50 in his pocket, and a promise he intended to keep. "Come on, Maya, hurry up," Elias laughed, his voice rich and warm as he held the bakery door open. 6-year-old Maya bounded inside, shaking the rain from her bright yellow coat like a happy puppy. She had gotten a perfect score on her spelling test, and Elias had promised her a chocolate cupcake, a rare luxury they could barely afford this month. Elias stepped up to the bakery counter, carefully counting the damp dollar bills in his hand. But as he waited in line, he noticed Maya wasn't looking at the colorful display case. She was staring toward the back corner of the room. Elias followed his daughter's gaze, his breath caught in his throat. He saw the wheelchair first. Then, he saw the small, beautiful girl in the pink dress, sitting entirely alone in front of a massive cake, silently crying while the rest of the wealthy room carried on with their perfect, privileged lives. Elias knew what grief looked like. He saw it in the mirror every morning. He recognized the heavy, suffocating weight of profound loneliness sitting on that little girl's shoulders. He looked down at the $12 in his hand, then looked back at the paralyzed child. Maya tugged gently on his rough, sawdust-covered sleeve. "Daddy," she whispered, her big brown eyes filled with innocent empathy. "She's crying on her birthday. That's against the rules." Elias smiled, a sad, deep smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. He didn't think about the social boundaries. He didn't care about the judgmental stares from the men in expensive suits. "You're right, Bug," Elias whispered back. "Let's go break some rules." Elias approached the table with slow, deliberate steps. He didn't want to startle the little girl. Maya trailed right beside him, holding a slightly crumpled paper bag containing her single chocolate cupcake like it was a royal treasure. Clara looked up. Her eyes were still glassy with unshed tears. She tensed immediately, her small hands automatically gripping the armrests of her titanium wheelchair. She braced herself for the usual pitying glance, the awkward, patronizing smile adults always gave her before quickly walking away. But Elias didn't look at the wheelchair. He looked directly into her eyes. "Excuse me," Elias said, his voice a low, comforting rumble that cut through the polite murmurs of the bakery. "My daughter and I couldn't help but notice that you have an awful lot of cake for one person, and no one should celebrate a birthday alone. May we join you?" Clara stared at him, her small mouth parted in shock. For the last 2 years, people only approached her to offer medical updates, to push her chair, or to apologize for her condition. No stranger had ever asked to simply sit with her. Before Clara could find the words to answer, Maya popped out from behind her father's legs. "Hi, I'm Maya," she announced cheerfully. She placed her cheap paper bag right next to Clara's magnificent, towering strawberry cake. "I got a perfect score on my spelling test today. Dad bought me a chocolate cupcake to celebrate. We can share it if you want. It has rainbow sprinkles." The sheer, unfiltered innocence of the offer pierced right through Clara's heavily guarded walls. She looked at the cheap, slightly squished cupcake, and then at the massive, untouched gourmet cake her mother had bought with a limitless black card. Slowly, a tiny, fragile smile pulled at the corners of Clara's mouth. "I'm Clara," she whispered. You can sit." Elias pulled out a chair for Maya and then took a seat himself. He moved with a quiet, unhurried grace. He didn't hover over Clara, and he didn't ask where her parents were. He treated her like she was the most normal 7-year-old girl in the world. 7 is a big year, Clara, Elias said, leaning back in his chair. I'm Elias. I build things out of wood. What do you do? Clara blinked. It was such an ordinary question, but it felt revolutionary. People usually asked how she was feeling or if her legs hurt. I read books, she said softly. And I like drawing, but I can't do much else anymore. Her eyes drifted downward toward her motionless legs, hidden beneath the cashmere blanket. The heavy sadness threatened to return. Elias noticed the shift. He reached into the deep pocket of his canvas work jacket and pulled out a small, smooth block of scrap cedar wood and a blunt carving knife he used for whittling. You know, Elias said casually, a lot of people look at a piece of scrap wood and throw it away because it's not a tree anymore. They think it's broken. But I think that's exactly when the wood gets to decide what it really wants to be. He began to move the knife across the wood with practiced, hypnotic precision. Small curls of cedar fell onto the table, releasing a warm, earthy scent that mixed perfectly with the smell of the bakery's vanilla and sugar. Maya leaned over, resting her chin on her hands. Dad can make anything, she told Clara proudly. He fixed my broken bicycle, and he made me a whole castle out of old shipping pallets. Clara watched, mesmerized. The wealthy patrons around them continued their hushed conversations, casting uncomfortable, sideways glances at the dusty carpenter sitting with the billionaire's disabled daughter. But Elias didn't care. He was entirely focused on the wood, and on the little girl watching him. My legs are broken, Clara whispered suddenly. The confession spilled out of her before she could stop it. The words felt incredibly heavy, a burden she had carried entirely alone in the massive, empty mansion. The doctors said they can't be fixed. Elias stopped carving. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He didn't patronize her by saying everything was going to be perfectly fine. He looked at her with a profound, deep understanding born from his own grief. Sometimes, Clara, Elias said gently, his voice incredibly tender, things don't need to be fixed to be exactly the way they were before. Sometimes, they just need someone patient enough to help them find a new way to be beautiful. He blew the sawdust off the block of wood and placed it on the table in front of her. It was a tiny, perfectly carved bird with its wings spread wide, ready to take flight. Clara gasped. She reached out with trembling fingers and traced the delicate wooden feathers. For a child who had felt permanently grounded and trapped in a chair for 2 long years, the wooden bird was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. It's for you, Elias smiled, to remind you that you don't need legs to fly. For the first time since the tragic accident, Clara laughed. It wasn't a polite, rehearsed giggle. It was a real, bright, bell-like sound that echoed beautifully through the quiet bakery. Maya cheered and immediately started cutting the massive strawberry cake, insisting that the wooden bird needed a slice too. At that table, surrounded by the smell of cedar and sugar, Clara wasn't a paralyzed liability. She wasn't a problem to be managed by a busy CEO. She was just a 7-year-old girl, laughing with her new friends. But outside, the freezing rain continued to fall, and a sleek, black Maybach was just pulling back up to the curb. The heavy glass door of La Petite Patisserie swung open, letting in a gust of freezing rain and the sharp, unmistakable click of expensive heels. Evelyn Vance stepped inside, her phone pressed tightly to her ear. She had just spent the last hour verbally destroying 2 vice presidents to save the merger. Her mind was a whirlwind of profit margins, legal clauses, and corporate strategy. She was exhausted, running entirely on adrenaline and black coffee, eager to simply retrieve her daughter, get back into the quiet Maybach, and go home. She ended the call without saying goodbye and looked toward the corner table. Evelyn's heart did not just drop, it plummeted like a stone. She expected to see Clara sitting quietly, exactly where she had been left. Instead, her paralyzed daughter was surrounded. Sitting at the table was a large, broad-shouldered man wearing a filthy, sawdust-covered canvas jacket. Beside him was a strange child in a cheap yellow raincoat. And worst of all, the rugged man was holding a knife. For a woman who lived in a world of security details and gated communities, the sight of a disheveled stranger holding a blade near her disabled child bypassed all logic and hit pure, primal panic. The corporate executive vanished, replaced entirely by a terrified, furious mother. "Get away from her!" Evelyn's voice rang out, sharp and commanding as a whip. The gentle hum of the bakery died instantly. Wealthy patrons froze, their coffee cups suspended in midair. Elias stopped carving immediately. He didn't panic. He smoothly folded the small whittling knife, slipped it into his pocket, and stood up. With a fluid, protective motion, he moved slightly, placing himself between the furious woman and his own daughter, Maya. Evelyn marched across the polished floor, her eyes blazing with an arctic fury. She positioned herself protectively in front of Clara's wheelchair, glaring at Elias as if he were a disease. "Who are you?" Evelyn demanded, her voice shaking with rage. She looked at his worn-out boots, the grease on his jeans, and the sawdust clinging to his hair. Her aristocratic disgust was palpable. "How dare you approach my daughter? Are you looking for a handout? Do you think because she's in a wheelchair, she's an easy target for a beggar?" Elias did not flinch. He did not cower beneath the weight of her billion-dollar indignation. He stood with the quiet, unshakable dignity of a man whose worth was not tied to his bank account. "Ma'am," Elias said, his voice a low, steady rumble that contrasted sharply with her panic. "There was no harm intended. We just saw—" "I don't care what you saw," Evelyn interrupted, reaching into her designer bag for her phone to call her security detail. "You have exactly 5 seconds to take your child and leave before I have you arrested for harassment." "Mom, stop!" The small, desperate voice didn't come from Elias or Maya. It came from the wheelchair. Evelyn froze. Her thumb hovered over her phone screen. She turned to look down at Clara, expecting to see her daughter trembling in fear. But Clara wasn't crying. For the first time in 2 years, there was color in Clara's pale cheeks. Her eyes were not dull and vacant, they were bright and fierce, and she was holding something tightly against her chest. "He didn't hurt me, Mom," Clara said, her voice stronger than Evelyn had heard it since before the accident. "He's my friend. They're my friends." Evelyn's mind struggled to process the words. "Friends?" She looked at the table. There, sitting right next to the massive, untouched $200 strawberry cake she had bought with her black card, was a squished, cheap chocolate cupcake with rainbow sprinkles. The contrast was devastating. Maya, still hiding slightly behind her father's leg, peeked out. Her big brown eyes looked up at the furious CEO without fear, only a child's innocent honesty. "She was crying," Maya explained softly. "It's her birthday, and she was all alone. My daddy says no one should be alone on their birthday, so we shared my cupcake." The words hit Evelyn like a physical blow. She was crying. She was all alone. Slowly, Evelyn's gaze drifted from the cheap cupcake back to her daughter's hands. Clara carefully opened her small fingers to reveal what she was protecting. It was a tiny, perfectly carved wooden bird with its wings spread wide. "He made it for me," Clara whispered, looking up at her mother. "He told me that sometimes broken things just need to find a new way to be beautiful. He told me I don't need legs to fly." The air in Evelyn's lungs vanished. The heavy, impenetrable armor she had worn every single day since her husband's death, the armor of a cold, unstoppable CEO, suddenly shattered into a million pieces. She looked at Elias. She saw the sawdust on his hands, the deep weariness in his eyes, and the gentle, protective way he held his own daughter. He wasn't a beggar. He was a father. A father who, despite having nothing, had given her daughter the one thing Evelyn's billions could not buy: a reason to smile. While Evelyn had been busy saving a corporate merger, This poor carpenter had been saving her daughter's soul. Evelyn's phone slipped from her trembling hand, clattering loudly onto the bakery floor. The fierce, untouchable CEO of Vance Enterprises covered her mouth as a ragged, entirely ungraceful sob tore from her throat. Her knees went weak, and right there, in front of the wealthy patrons of Seattle, Evelyn fell to her knees beside Clara's wheelchair and wept. The upscale bakery was completely silent, save for the ragged, breathy sobs of a billionaire who had just realized how profoundly poor she truly was. Evelyn Vance, the untouchable Iron CEO of Seattle, remained on her knees on the polished tile floor. Her expensive charcoal blazer was wrinkled, her perfect makeup ruined by tears. The wealthy patrons around them stared in uncomfortable shock, unsure how to process the sight of a woman who commanded global markets breaking down in front of a dirty, sawdust-covered carpenter. Elias did not look at her with triumph. He didn't gloat, and he didn't judge. He knew exactly what the crushing weight of grief and regret felt like. Moving with slow, deliberate grace, Elias reached into his canvas jacket, pulled out a clean, slightly faded cotton handkerchief, and gently offered it to the weeping woman. Evelyn looked at the rough, calloused hand holding the cloth. Her trembling fingers reached out and took it. "I'm sorry," she choked out, her voice barely a whisper. I just wanted to give her everything. I thought if I built a big enough empire, it would protect her from the pain of losing her father. I thought money could fix it. Money can buy a titanium wheelchair and a $200 cake, Mrs. Vance," Elias said softly, his voice a steady anchor in her storm of panic. "But it can't buy back a Tuesday afternoon. It can't buy someone to share the cake with." Evelyn looked up at him. Her survival instinct, honed by years in ruthless boardrooms, suddenly kicked in. It was a defense mechanism. She reached blindly for her designer bag, pulling out her heavy, leather-bound checkbook. Her hands were shaking violently. "Please," Evelyn pleaded, tears falling onto the blank checks. "Let me compensate you. Name your price. 10,000? 50,000? I can write you a check right now for staying with her. For the wooden bird, for making her laugh. Just, please, let me pay you." The silence that followed was heavy. Little Maya hid her face against her father's leg, not understanding why the rich lady was waving paper around while crying. Elias looked at the checkbook, then looked deeply into Evelyn's desperate, red-rimmed eyes. He reached out and gently pushed her trembling hand back, closing the checkbook. "Put that away, ma'am," Elias said firmly, but with infinite kindness. "You cannot pay me for being a human being, and you certainly cannot buy your way out of your own guilt." He looked down at Clara, who was watching them with wide, hopeful eyes. "She doesn't need your checkbook. She just needs her mother." Elias stood up. He gently placed a hand on Maya's shoulder. "Come on, Bug. We've taken up enough of their time. Say goodbye to Clara." "Bye, Clara," Maya chirped, waving her small hand. "Happy birthday!" Clara's face fell instantly. The brief, beautiful light that had filled her eyes vanished, replaced by the familiar, terrifying shadow of loneliness. "No," Clara whispered, her small hands gripping the wheels of her chair. "Please don't go. Please." Elias offered a sad, apologetic smile, zipped up Maya's yellow raincoat, and walked toward the door. The bakery chime rang out, a sharp, final sound, as the carpenter and his daughter stepped back out into the freezing Seattle rain. Inside, Evelyn's phone began to vibrate violently on the floor. The screen flashed with the name of her chief operating officer. The multi-million-dollar merger was calling. It was the defining moment of her career. Evelyn looked at the glowing phone. Then she looked at Clara. Her paralyzed daughter was staring at the closed bakery door, crying silently, clutching the cheap wooden bird to her chest as if it were her own beating heart. For 34 years, Evelyn Vance had always chosen the phone. She had always chosen the empire. but not today. Evelyn raised her expensive designer heel and brought it down hard, crushing the ringing cell phone against the tile floor. The screen shattered into a spiderweb of black glass. Without a word, Evelyn scrambled to her feet, pushed past the stunned bakery manager, and burst through the heavy glass doors into the freezing rain. "Wait!" Evelyn screamed, her voice tearing through the sound of the storm. Elias stopped halfway down the block, turning around to see the billionaire CEO sprinting toward him through the puddles, her expensive suit completely soaked. Her bodyguard was running behind her with an umbrella, but she shoved it away. She stopped a few feet from Elias, breathing heavily, the rain washing away the last traces of the untouchable executive. "Don't leave," Evelyn begged, her voice raw and stripped of all pride. "Please, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to fix my daughter's heart. I forgot how to be a mother. Teach me. Please, teach me how to build something real." Elias stood in the freezing rain, looking at the broken, shivering billionaire who had just surrendered her entire world for the sake of her child. He didn't see an arrogant CEO anymore. He just saw a mother, terrified and lost, asking for directions home. Slowly, the rough carpenter smiled. "The first rule of building anything," Elias said gently, the rain dripping from his jaw, "is that you don't do it in a tailored suit. Come on, let's go back inside and eat some cake." That rainy Tuesday afternoon was the day the ice around Evelyn Vance's heart finally melted. The transition wasn't immediate, and it wasn't easy. You cannot undo years of absence overnight. But Evelyn had finally realized that repairing a family required the same patience Elias used to carve a piece of wood. She stepped down from her role as CEO, appointing a trusted vice president to run the daily operations. She traded her 80-hour work weeks for something vastly more valuable: time. Over the next few months, the sleek black Maybach was rarely seen parked outside corporate headquarters. Instead, it was frequently parked outside a dusty, run-down carpenter's shop on the edge of the city. Inside the shop, the air was warm and smelled of pine and cedar. Clara's titanium wheelchair sat comfortably near the workbench. She wasn't hidden away in a sterile mansion with paid nurses anymore. She was surrounded by life. Maya became the loud, chaotic, fiercely protective sister Clara had never had. They spent hours painting the wooden toys Elias carved, their hands covered in bright colors. And Evelyn was there too. The woman who once wore $5,000 suits now wore Elias's oversized flannel shirts, her hair tied back in a messy bun, learning how to sand down rough edges of oak. She learned to laugh again. She learned how to listen to the quiet rhythms of her daughter's heart, just as Elias listened to the grain of the wood. 1 year later, the rain in Seattle didn't feel cold anymore. It was Clara's 8th birthday. There was no $200 gourmet strawberry cake, and there was no empty table at an upscale bakery. Instead, there was a slightly lopsided, overly frosted chocolate cake sitting on a wooden workbench, baked entirely by Maya and Evelyn. Clara sat in her wheelchair, her face glowing with a radiant, undeniable joy. She blew out her 8 candles surrounded by noise, sawdust, and love. Evelyn stood near the back of the shop, watching her daughter laugh. She felt a warm, strong hand gently wrap around hers. She looked up at Elias. His brown eyes were steady, offering the quiet, unshakable safety he had given them since the day they met. Evelyn leaned her head against his shoulder, her heart finally, completely at peace. Sometimes, the universe breaks our carefully constructed plans to force us to look at what truly matters. Evelyn had thought Clara's paralyzed legs were the thing that needed fixing, but in the end, it was Evelyn's own blindness that was cured. She had learned the greatest lesson a parent could ever know. Family isn't about the things you can buy. It's about the spaces you are willing to fill. And sometimes, the most beautiful things in life are built from the pieces the rest of the world thought were broken. In a world obsessed with perfection, bank accounts, and corporate titles, this story is a profound reminder that true healing comes from those who see our broken pieces and choose to stay. The billionaire mother thought her limitless wealth could fix her daughter's paralysis, but all the little girl needed was someone willing to share her silence and push her wheelchair. The poor single dad had no fortunes to offer, but he possessed the greatest currency of all: boundless compassion. He taught a powerful CEO that family isn't about what you can purchase. It's about the people who walk into your life when the rest of the world walks past. If you have someone who loves you despite your flaws, hold them tight tonight. Time is the only wealth we cannot earn back. Our videos are created to bring meaningful perspectives on love, loss, and healing. We never intend to sexualize characters or scenes. We do not promote abusive, hateful, or harmful behavior. Our mission is to make YouTube a safe, inspiring space for everyone. We respect YouTube's fair use copyright guidelines. This video is an original storytelling project, written, voiced, and produced by Heartland Tales.